A dangerous game of deranged chess masters. Love crashes into you like an oncoming van. Crash victim speeding on a motorcycle fueled up on nitroglycerin. The dangerous game of deranged chess masters warring for who to win a round of blowjobs and doggy style. A game of blood, necks, and teeth. The angular blade hitting similarly to a headsman's sword. There was a time I didn't think I'd ever date, preferring to recline in a private jet and masturbate. Watch nothing but porn stars on holographic screens textured with various kinds of cell shading. It was then, as I lay thinking as I was dying, remembering the smell of sweat and tears by my ex-roommate. Have you ever thought of writing for erotica magazines? You sure have the sex drive for it. Alone, my body returning to the midnight forest where wolves hunt the deer and bears for the fish. My life was of one dying wish. To see Ahina Medea again. Instead, I dreamed of snoring on the motel bed, the texture of fallen hair on the floor, the unclean dishes that were only washed in the bathtub. Or am I renting too much headspace? She said. I woke up in the hospital in a daze. The doctor said that I had been out for a week. I was more worried that they could peer into my mind, using a dream-scanning machine. My dreams of silent hills and ghosts of another past merging into a collective group of various government entities, on the verge between life and death. For some people, what they see is a tunnel of light, but for me, it was always night. Except for me and my angel, my Ahina Medea. The girl who wore a lopsided bow and at other times a flower in her hair, as we snuggled under the moonlight dreaming of fireflies and ladybugs. My dream of being with her again as I lay beyond the mortal life. No, I'm just thinking about something else, I would say to my ex-roommate, who was not Ahina Medea, but some monster from my past whom I had hoped to leave forgotten like dust in the wind. Because for me, there was only Ahina. As I opened her coffin and kissed her cheek. and dreamed of being with her in death. Instead, I grabbed my shotgun, which I had purchased on the black market, outside the oversight of my parents, whom were now hopelessly bought into the state. Even for Dad, who had lost his prostate among other organs. Yet for me, there was only me, the whole me, and nothing else. Me for my Ahina Marie. As I dreamed of severed lady heads laying beside me on my lap, the last moments of their life fading into total darkness, while simply no longer wanting to feel alone, so I could be with somebody into eternity. But life is a guillotine. You have to be cutthroat. My own desires. When I had met Ahina Medea, one of the first nights we allowed her to visit my place was when she had various cuisine styles she wanted to teach me, because she knew that I liked to cook. She introduced me to pâte d'Alsace, and when I lovingly spoke French to her, she would always correct me on the grammar. But I always took it in good cheer. There was some reason I knew that she didn't want me to come back to her place, so when I was visiting with her outside of these occasions, she would hang out at the local bookstore, focusing primarily on foreign language. Of course, the language she chose would be French. At night, when she once cooked for us, she made a dish that we all really loved, although it was closer to Italian than French because of her rebel streak, keeping her from being willing to cook in a French fashion all the way, which meant including a tomato sauce in recipes that called for cream, among other variations. One night, Ahina Marie was gone for a little too long, and I wondered why she wasn't there to teach me how to cook. Then the restroom flushed, but the soup was still boiling and the tea was brewing. And this was what reminded me of an online relationship I once had with Desiree. "Is everything okay, Desiree?" I asked. Desiree had been my first girlfriend before Ahina Marie, though we mostly dated online. "My name is Ahina. Who is Desiree?" she asked, flabbergasted. "You're not seeing other girls, are you?" she finished. "No, it was someone I dated before you. But you said I was your first date." "Anything to get you in my pants." Ahina Marie pushed me out of the way, determined to finish the cooking that I started. "I'll make you a soup to prove how much I love you." I wasn't sure what this meant exactly, but I knew that previously she had had troubles with law enforcement because other friends' families she visited had gotten sick. Because I'm your girl, not Desiree. Nothing seemed to come of it at first. At the dinner table we ate the soup. I was the only one in the family besides Ahina Marie that didn't seem to get sick. My parents were polite enough not to say anything, but when Ahina Marie had not visited one night, Mom told me next time she comes, it's long pig for dinner. Say goodbye to the French girl. Our relationship had never been the same since, and now I long for a day when I can cook like Ahina Marie because her cooking was not bad at all. My parents were just jealous of her abilities. They pretended to be sick just so they could get my darling in trouble, have her dumped overboard into the sea. So much for lobster night for my darling Ahina Marie. Despite the ill will, even if we both take pills, slowly we turn to the inside of the mind. Veer U-turn, unwind, enjoy the car crash enveloping into flames, death in a flash 2 times over, deny one's inner lust, enjoy the seatbelt, turn the rust, savor the pulsing sensation of inglorious feelings having their way. Reality changes with age, enjoy the car crash enveloping into flash, killing you at a tender age. No more vigilantes, no more rescue from rust. If only I'd never met Desiree, the girl that kick-started my anxiety when it had once died. My issue with French girls was indirect and not the easiest to follow, although my assumption had never been that they were blonde, which is an entirely different issue. For me and Desiree, we had met each other on Quizella. I was 15 and she was 13. She was the second French girl I had ever known. We used to watch together movies like Godzilla. We dated for about a year, but for me it felt like many a year. Desiree did not kickstart my issue with blondes, but was a contributing factor. She was never prime enough to multiply by 59. I certainly was not her modular inverse to unfold her life's puzzles. Yet she created many quizzes similarly to this other place that models itself more after another writing site. But still, her has personality quizzes. This was before the French had invaded the decaying United States. For me, I had already had issues with Bianca and Stephanie, but had just gotten out of the swing of detesting flamenco and masked vigilantes. I understand the irony of my hunting after other vampires. Our love was temporary, finite. She treated me like my hair was covered in mites, but I justified it as being alright. We split because she was an awful kink shamer and I simply wanted to be a stoner. So when you like to see girls in certain outfits, she asked, briefly holding back the second portion. Then resuming, do you mean you like girls because they wear this outfit? At the time I had been unaware of French fashion, and the French had long-term issues with Germans, which I would learn later they were associated with. I don't, but what if I said I did? I said. Needless to say, she didn't take this challenge too well. So I built up the suspicion of the idea that in general, girls who were of French heritage didn't like to be challenged, more so than any other person of female gender. Me begging the question, goodwill was never dealt out, like even thinning rose petals. I simply wanted to pour down her throat molten metal, but the idea, despite the thought, gave me something of a sore throat. I had resolved from that point onward, which Ahina Marie challenged inside me, to never again date a French girl. I tried finding more Celtic girls to date and developed a fancy for Swedish girls. But most of these problems finding dates came down to this particular disdain for crepes and chocolate-flavored flamenco near the southern edge of Spain. My body was an object, rotten meat. I caved into my own desires. No bread to share. You may wonder, if the technology were available, why I would personally choose not to time travel. The reason is simple. Whenever I wrote about time travel at a young age, it was a matter of allowing myself the witness of the execution of my beloved princess within the pages of digital lit RPG novels. There is something about the flow of blood draining from their severed neck, and the feeling of fluid that once gave life feeding my inner core. In traditional vampire lore, the vampire is the one that drains the blood. But with the execution of a French girl, her neck slowly lowering into the stock of the guillotine, it was the idea of not having to kill them myself. For deep down, I knew that as I watched in horror as my father raised up the blade on Ahina Marie, that part of me did not really want them to die. But there was a part of me, despite the desire to not see it happen, that reveled in the eye of seeing one's dark brown, almost black locks fall inside the wicker basket, where other revolutionary heads of women have been before. In my own personal lore, I dream of vampire queens and werewolf kings, yet in these dreams of dreams, I knew that despite my own inner lust for the darkness, that I would never be one of the demons. Midnight eclipse falling, the rotation of the earth allowing for certain gravity of lunar frequency for lust. The lust of sharpened bloody axes and angular guillotine blades gone to rust. The flow of B-cup breasts covered in genial tears. The best beheading of a French girl I'd seen in all my years. But the reality was, I was not a vampire. I was only one in the desire for blood, but I always hated others who never thought twice about killing people. My father adopted nicely to his new job as a headsman after working as a short-order cook. What can I say? I like cooking pork. In reference to him sending beheaded girls to the dissection chamber of lore. This was not the chamber of disillusioned chambermaids or the flow of severed braids as younger ones entered the orphanage to sing Roman Catholic hymns inside of a decorative dome. This was not Rome, nor was this France. Now it was the old United States, where France took its place. We beheaded women in their underpants. We beheaded them in long flowing dresses. We tore to expose the neck, and everything in between. Disillusioned poodle skirts, the flow of gentle blood squirts that came from fair ladies whom were once flirts. We didn't need a hell. I was already in it. Hina Marie was the first to understand our language gap that kept me from being able to make myself try to deal with being around Spanish and French girls and other Latinas of the European continent. After the French takeover, we kept a low-key profile. We only met once or twice a week, and then I had a feeling she was doing things that she never bothered telling me about. Would you be willing to tell an executioner you were trying to poison your father? And this time, he became increasingly frazzled. We finally broke up when I told her, jokingly, that I liked dead girls more than one still breathing. Even though I didn't like dead girls, what I liked was blood play. The entire misunderstanding made our relationship gradually fall apart. We didn't have a yelling match, but she was constantly afraid to be around me because she thought I'd cut her head off at any moment. Despite doing that would essentially mean going rogue. But I was rogue among other rogues, preferring to sling dagger blades instead of shotguns. I got a razor arrow later. A razor arrow was a special form of bladed projectile weapon. The projectile would not have as much freedom in trajectory as a regular bullet. The blades were for decapitation, the victim restrained by a portable lunette. Strapped to a portable board once the body was paralyzed, the priest would guide their soul into the afterlife, if they were not already atheistic. Whether Hina Marie was Spanish or French, it no longer mattered. She was a child, and so was I. Despite not wanting to watch another girl die, my paralysis allowed her to leave me behind, and left my only love in hell, in a world behind. She was such a quiet girl, and I never understood her tendency to avoid talking to me during the hours in which both of us would be up. We were both insomniacs, but lived in somewhat different time zones. And much of the time she would visit family up in Montana. These were the hours I would spend riding or imagining myself riding fictional horses under the sunset, with her riding behind me on my back. But instead we both rode the railless train tracks across different parts of the United States, splitting off our lives at the knee. Why she chose to come back to the old country of Tennessee was never something I ever understood. The Americas, after the war, borrowed a significant amount of French culture, one of which involved executing foreign nationals, all contrary to international law. This meant she was at constant risk of being recaptured, like an outlaw in the wild, robbing different banks across the country, anything to keep her from being apprehended in her own home country where the corpses of her dead brothers and father still lay behind, and her sister Ursula never forgiving her for this sin. There was a chance she would be murdered again. I watched movies about alien invaders and wondered how much of people knew the reality of my own desires, whether I would be treated in the same way as her, despite her more numerous experience in the deserts across the old empire. The empire that once housed a land far more expansive than the Roman Empire, and yet lasted for a shorter time frame due to the greed of man and the coming of the nuclear bomb. Much of the world after World War III became a vast, open, desert expanse. When back in Tennessee, we would go to bowling alleys, go to movies together, and very occasionally she would give me favors with her outfit and give me blowjobs under a mistletoe tree when our parents were not home. We had just graduated high school and I knew that my mom would not be back in town for a while, so I thought. One blowjob would not hurt. Unzipping, t-shirt ripping, wrist tied to the edges of the bed, the feeling of lotion on the homestead. But no dog collars under the flow of soft LED lights. She only stood in the pillory when she stole those pair of shoes, and not when they finally pursued the other investigation. That resulted in the death of most of her family members. Thus, my family was called on the scene. If I could describe myself, it is something similar to the offspring of Elizabeth Bathory crossed over with Camilla. I didn't used to think I could date a girl outside the web, given the nature of my condition. For loving women with their heads cut off, their heads rolling into a whisker basket, you might not think I'd love a girl outside of the guillotine family. I live just a few yards into the 21st century, and I can still hear the screams of women pleading for their lives in the various revolutions of France. And yet the idea of a girl whose head would be on a metal slab in the mortuary was never something I think would bother me before. I spent so many nights and days after school enjoying myself to the severed necks, the flow of bluish fluid gradually becoming as dark as crimson sky, the flow of flamenco on the piano to sinister rhymes. Yet the song of the lost children played in deranged melodies, the song of madness, the song of decay, the song of the damned, the song of a girl crying while holding the severed head of her once true love. It was with this that I had made my decision, that I could keep her severed head and treat her as one of my own children and run as far away from town as I could. But the real world was a no-man's land, a land where secret police stalked the street. There was a lack of stores that could sell normal footwear at a decent price. This was a land of giant cockroaches, the return of hair lice, the return of the old classes in earlier centuries. I wanted my world to end, yet I wanted to end my life on my own terms. I wanted to finish the obligations that I had left as a fiction writer, even if it was only a few autobiographical shorts. but there were some autobiographical facts that people almost never share. A world with no self-realization that there is a part of us, just like Dracula and Carmilla. Where the new Bastia was rising, the land of total uprisings, a land of dirt and decay, the dead is rising, and there is no bread to share.